Yo, check this out. This is Wayne Wonder, representing for Warieka LTV. You see the vision, don't it? See the vision. Warieka LTV. Keep it locked.
No, I'm gonna tell you. We, us as bloggers, these are the issues that we need to address. You understand what I said? You see? Set the path for the youth. Share, like, and subscribe and stay tuned to the channel because I don't know all this shit. Yes, I. Greetings once again in the mighty name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie the First, and all things that's good. See? Welcome viewers and subscribers. And viewers, if you happen to just watch and like the content, subscribe, and you get a notification when the next chapter is being uploaded, so that you can tune in. See? So we'll continue with the book reading the book Death Row Experience and Jamaican Death Row, as spoken by someone who had lived there for a while. You get what I say? Yeah. The writer, Mario Hector, he was sentenced on death row, as you might know. And he wrote his experience, his and others' experience, and what the death row is really all about. So you can go back into the rest of the video, and you see where I've read to. I'm now at chapter 6, so you can catch up, yeah. So we read chapter 6 now, slave driver. Saying, we give thanks. The ordinary lawman seeks employment in the prison service primarily for the job security. A few duped by misleading advertisements speaking of the great and humanitarian calling of correctional officers, do enter the service sincerely in pursuit of a career. At training school, the curriculum takes them through the pros and cons of rehabilitation and the basis of penology and sociology. They are taught that prisoners are human beings and must be treated as such, that the offender is incarcerated as a punishment and not for punishment, that the offender will not be placed in their charge to be tortured, brutalized, and degraded, but rather to be incapacitated for the benefit and protection of society in an atmosphere where the offender may, over a period, reform, with the able assistance of him, the correctional officer. After months of training, the recruit is supposedly prepared and ready for the job. Immediately on entering the prison, the futility of his theoretical training becomes self-evident. He is surprised and astounded. It wasn't the job he had been prepared for. He had been trained for an illusion, for a penal system projected by the administration and the propaganda of the Department of Correctional Services, a penal system that did not exist outside the pages of the textbook. For the young recruit, this bursting of the illusory balloon is a profound experience, particularly for those in search of a career. He may have postulated during training that being a professional in a certain trade or skill, he would pass on the same to his charge. But when he gets there, he finds no such opportunity or facilities. He may have thought he could reason with the intellect of his charge, but when he gets there, he finds no such opportunity or facilities. He may have thought that he could reason with the intellect of his charge to effect reform, but when he gets there, he finds the very prison regulation prohibit free speech and cordial relations between staff and inmates. He may have believed all his life that the power of the word was more than the power of violence. But when he gets there, they hand him a riot button as part of his uniform and advise him to swing first and listen afterwards. He might have believed, according to the meat of his training, that he was on his way to correctional institution, wherein there was an atmosphere conducive to reform. But when he gets there, finds a system of stagnation, chaos, and institutionalized administrative nonchalance in which only a genius of extraordinary strong will can reform. He may have fervently hoped that he, being a man of well-defined and adhered to morals, may be able to rescue the soul of some convicts from the garbage heap of life. But when he gets there, finds that the life and his role as correctional officer revolves around institutionalized corruption and degradation that threatens to swamp his own soul. The penal system he enters, contrary to what he was taught at training school, does not rest on any principal concept of rehabilitation or the argument of Jeremy Bentham or Horton and Hunt. No such thing. The system functioned and was directed by norms that was convenient to the slavery and colonialism in the first instance until 1962. Norms that were since watered down by succeeding administration without altering the fundamentals and the specifics role of prisoners as an integral post in the network of Babylon for the control and exploitation of the working class. Norms that award the prisoners a dirty nigger slave status and the warder the absolute power of backmaster and slave driver. Norms that hold it necessary to destroy the mind and soul of a person to hold his body prisoner. Norms that debate the value of humanity and influence and sustain a subculture in the prison completely out of step with the rest of society. It is the old prison bosun. The new recruit soon discovered who runs the prison and not the regulation, which only provide a colonial framework for captivity. These old bosuns entered the service 20 or so years ago when there was no such training as a training school for prison warders. That came only in 1969. Those who entered the system before the advent of the training school were chosen strictly by appearance. It was enough that the warder was big, stout, strong, and quick to anger. It didn't matter that most of them were barely literate or they were employed to swing buttons, herd prisoners, turn keys, and not to push buttons. It is these pre-training school bosuns, mellowed by time and corruption, who are the living rules and regulation. The razzle-dazzle of the modern training course has no influence on them. They began in the service under the white man's rule and learned how it was done. As far as they were concerned, it is best done the same way today. Some of these old bosuns are still unaware that slavery was supposed to have been abolished. At this point, the bright boys get out, realizing that there is no such thing as a career in the prison service. They leave for greener pastures where, along with the pay, they can use their consciences and maintain their dignity and characters. Those who choose to remain in the prison service settle in and soon become institutionalized in the mores and norms of the system, responding in their different ways. Given the human element, all, however, becomes firmly institutionalized in the fundamentals of the system. The penal system is a seven-walled and barbed wire compound scattered across the island. The institution is the unaccepted mode of the relationship and way of life within these wild communities. This institution dictates the mode of behavior, the statutes and ascribed roles, the common features underlying the norm perpetuated by the philosophy of colonial penology that protracted this institution is that the convict is a human without any rights, a human who has transgressed the law of society and must therefore be made to suffer that the warder is always right, that it was part of the job to smash a skull, break a limb, or take home a pound or two of the prison meat. Only a few warders constantly exposed to the pragmatics of those norms manage to stand above the inherent filth and degradation and retain the vestige of rational human conduct. These few are the dying species. They represent the only element of human response to the predicament of the oppressed convict, the fervent, fanatical, more institutionalized robots of Babylon control. Eschew and resent their presence. Eschew and resent their presence. Many lives have been saved by these decent warders, but as there are so few of them, they are never able to make any significant impact on the system. The human is a paradox with the simultaneous capacity for the highest of virtue and the worst of depravities. Those warders who become institutionalized let the more depraved side of their human make up to be fashioned and brought by Babylon to bear on the systematic oppression of the poor of the land. Some of these warders thus become precision instrument of Babylon's will. Sadists and perverts, they have a polished justification for the plunder they effect on the human estate. It doesn't matter to them how many bodies they have destroyed with their brutality, how many young and inexperienced prisoners they have locked up with known homosexual rapists. It doesn't matter how much illegal food they eat in the kitchen or how much they make from local rackets. It doesn't matter to them that they have lost their individuality and are transformed into robots of brutality and oppression. They will sanctimoniously suggest that they are the pilots in events, or alternatively rationalize that prison is an essential of social control. And furthermore, if they didn't do it, someone else would. The warders at St. Catherine District Prison are not removed for the humanitarian treatment of prisoners. Brutality is a prime norm of the institution here. Between January 1951 and February 1954, 15 prisoners died in this prison, some under the most shady circumstances. According to the prison rules, every death in the prison has to be reported to the coroner, yet only 5 of the 15 deaths were reported to the coroner. See the Duffus Commission Report, 1954. The press dubbed the warders button happy in headlines. The Barrett Commission of Inquiry reported them to be of poor quality and found that in a substantial number of cases, prisoners are struck by warders without lawful justification or excuse, even in satisfaction of sadistic tendencies. It is not by reason of genes or anything biological that makes these warders more brutal and sadistic than their counterparts in other prisons. It is that this institution has a peculiar brand of disregard for life and liberty, the perfected techniques of torture and brutality to a level way ahead of the other prisoners. One of the oldest and the island's second largest maximum security prison was built from the proceeds of a slave owner's legacy. It holds the gallows as an ever-present symbol of Babylon's disregard for life. The staff is made up of people from the local agricultural belt who have in the majority unsuccessfully knocked at all the other opportunity doors before ending up in the employ of Babylon. What they lack in brains, they make up for with ignorance and violence. A select group of them worked on death row. Select because they were rarely assigned any other post, and select because of the quotas of notches on their buttons. They ran the row and attend to the business of duplicity as professional sadists. We call them the Death Squad because it was this posse under the able command of the Funk who hogtied and prepared prisoners for execution. In the eyes of this select group, we were no more than gallows bait, awaiting execution because every one of us had murdered somebody. It was unthinkable to them that anybody on the road could be innocent, or that the court could acquit a prisoner after the process had gone so far. They postulated the eventual death of all of us and treated us as if we were already dead. Now that the struggle had begun, now that the blanket of fear and indecision was being raised at the end, their response was increased violence. The first instance of reprisal was not long in coming. Horace Coates, a brother on death row, had a visit. He was handcuffed and sent along with an escort to the office. Before Coates and escort reached the office, a gang of warders, without any provocation, proceeded to brutalize Coates. The warder in escort was a recruit, not yet institutionalized, and to his mind, he was responsible for Coates. Pulling his baton, he moved in to defend his charge. The scuffle between him and the attackers was brought to an end by the intervention of a senior officer. The visitors looked on in tears. In the following weeks, it became increasingly more dangerous to venture off the road. With the help of my attorney, Roy Taylor, I was able to keep off some of the more personal attacks on myself. But in other areas, I, like the rest of the brothers, could only suffer and plan as the reprisals spread into all areas of our life on the road. Visits would be sabotaged and visitors made to wait hours before seeing us. Mails written and delivered to the office for dispatch surfaced in scraps in the office garbage bin. Twice daily searches became occasions of antagonism and harassment. By then, a permanent cloud of tension had settled on the road. February 1974 brought to a close my second year on the road. Over this period, I was exposed to a procession of tragedies. Most of the elders had by then been executed. Some of them had become close to me, and it was always heartrending to see them lead or drag away a man to the gallows. One week, a man is there strong and healthy right before your eyes. Then the next week, you see them pass with him in a coffin. It is frightening. It's not an act done in a moment of anger, but people going about the place smiling and calm as they go about preparing to choke the life from a fellow human. I was especially moved by the execution of Lawrence Sinclair and Samuel Reed. Lawrence Sinclair was convicted for the gunslaying of another youth in West Kingston. The fact that Sinclair was a raving lunatic was never in dispute. He didn't talk, he ate his excrement, he ate his shit, and only bathed when forced by the squad. He was always beating an imaginary girl in his cell who was supposed to have another man. Nobody visited him. He didn't have an attorney. He didn't even file an appeal. The guy was stone crazy. When they came for him, he went like a lamb to the slaughter, with a stupid maniacal smile pasted on his face, completely unaware of what was happening. According to the warders, even the gallows he had maintained the maniacal. Even on the gallows, he had maintained the maniacal grin. Haile Selassie. Samuel Reed, a man in his old age, was convicted of murdering his common-law wife. He didn't hide his guilt. After a quarrel about a domestic matter, his woman had gone and burned all his life savings to spite him. Reed came out to see his money burning before his eyes, and in a fit of temper chopped up the woman. Whether they sent him alone, commuted his sentence, or hanged him, he could never again enjoy any peace of mind. He had loved that woman. She was the mother of his children. And he despised himself for having killed her and left his children without parents. Sometimes in the still of the night, we'd rap for hours. He'd monopolizing the conversation to talk on and on about this woman, expressing a profound respect about his deed with such a conviction that he could not find it possible to forgive himself. Never did I hear him advance any justification. If his death could restore his woman, he would willingly have died. On the road, Reed was a sincere Christian. He never fussed or got involved in any debate for fear he may hurt the other's feeling. He was constant in singing his hymn and observing the tenets of his religion. Before he had been on the road long, he was known as the Old Christian Man, and some Christian warders often brought him tracts. Reed firmly believed God would help him and nothing could change his belief. Even when they came for him that midday, Reed was on his knees, back turned to the door in prayer when they came for him. So casually had the escort entered that only a few prisoners were immediately aware of the hovering tragedy. The highest ranking officer signaled to a barefoot warder to open the door. The warder surprised him by pushing the key in his hand. He wasn't getting involved in this one. Silence as the officer contemplated his task. He himself was not so eager to be involved in this particular case, as he too claimed to be a Christian and had often brought Reed tracts. As the silence wore on, institutionalization overcame human sentiments, and the officers opened the door with a sudden burst of energy. Even when the door was open and the officers stepped in the cell, Reed was still on his knees. Placing a hand on his shoulder, the officer shook Reed into awareness. Helped to his feet, Reed was only then aware of the happening and reflected his shock and surprise on his face. His mind just failed to accept that his eyes beheld. His mind just failed to accept what his eyes beheld. The officer handcuffed Reed, who paused to pick up his Bible while uttering psalm, still convinced that God would by some miracle save his life. His departure brought tears to my eyes. 8 days later, they hanged him and laid his body to rest in a grave built for three. This, more than any other case, brought home to my mind the fact that capital punishment is an inhumane, nefarious, and evil form of punishment, Rasta. You know, see it. And guy, enjoy them thing, yeah. You know, see it. And think it hard. I will own a black youth them. I enjoy watching we youth them die off like a killer. Watch. You know what I say? I kill one another like that, Rasta. So, yeah, we're getting a capital punishment. Chapter 7. It is to be remembered that the white man brought hanging to Jamaica. No sooner had Christopher Columbus and his band of cutthroats arrived on the island that they began hanging the Arawaks. With this gruesome practice, they brought the accompanying philosophical justification for such killing. Neither the concept of hanging nor the philosophical justification was original to those colonists. They had inherited it from their ancestors. The fact is that someone along the line of his evolution, Homo sapiens, designed the notion of killing one man because that man had killed another. Fundamental to the development of hanging is the notion of revenge, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was not until the Middle Ages that the colonialist ancestors attached the defiant principle of hanging as a deterrent. They stopped calling it hanging then and euphemized it capital punishment. Since then, the whole notion of capital punishment being applied as a deterrent has been straightened out, polished, and promulgated as a theory of punishment which is crucial to social control. Today, it is written in our law and eloquently pronounced by the apologists of premeditated murder. Yet, even though this form of punishment has become institutionalized in many countries, and other thousands and thousands have been sacrificed on the public altar of social security, the apologists of this cannibal fiasco are yet to inject into its philosophical justification the logic and rationality that would render it palatable to the conscience of men, not blindly motivated by panic and revenge. Jeremy Bentham remains the most eloquent spokesman of the deterrent theory that is the centerpiece of the philosophical justification of capital punishment. According to him, general prevention ought to be the chief end of punishment, as it is real justification. If we could consider an offense which has been committed as an isolated fact, the like of which would never return, punishment would be useless. It would only be adding one evil to another. But when we consider that an unpunished crime leaves the path of crime open, not only to the same delinquent, but also to those who may have the same motives and opportunities for entering upon it, we perceive that punishment inflicted on the individual become a source of security to all. This punishment, which considered in itself appeared base and repugnant to all generous sentiments, is elevated to the first rank of benefits when it is regarded not as an act of wrath or vengeance against a quiet or unfortunate individual who has given way to mischievous inclinations, but as an indispensable sacrifice to the common safety. End quote. For centuries, organized societies have been hanging people for various offenses. A couple of centuries ago in our mother country, more than 150 crimes attracted capital punishment. Today, the spectre of execution is reserved almost exclusively for murder or treason. All these hangings are recorded as an indispensable sacrifice to the common safety, but have these thousands and thousands of people hanged prevented more people from committing murders? Does the occurrence of an execution give you the assurance that because people fear similar punishment instance of murder will cease? Frankly, it doesn't. And the lie it is philosophically justification becomes more apparent on further scrutiny. Capital punishment and further scrutiny. Capital punishment, the prospect of death on the gallows, is a thought that sends a chill up the spine of every human who would think premeditate murder. It could be shown and argued that capital punishment does deter people from premeditating murder, but such a line falls flat in the face of overwhelming evidence that those who behave brutally are not deterred by capital punishment, and that the majority of all murders were not premeditated. Of all the people I met on the road, I know only 2 who planned to take a life. The act is, in the majority of cases, a spontaneous expression of anger of a moment, unpredictable and unplanned. Even supposing capital punishment did deter 5% of would-be murderers, what about 95% undeterred? Why they were not deterred is a good question here. Why was it that when Samuel Reed came upon his wife's burning his life-saving, he was not deterred by fear of the gallows from fatally wounding her? Why would the chilling fear of the gallows deter Clifford Gray from fatally stabbing another youth in the heat of a fight? No answer. The simple reason, however, is that 95% of all murders are committed in the heat of the moment and are not premeditated. The paradox: man is capable of as much good as evil, and the record of man's destruction of his fellow men covers every epoch of his historical development. Yet, few men compound war notion of greed, envy, hatred, and even love into the act of premeditated murder of a fellow man at a person-to-person level. Intellectually, four specific and principled objectives can be formidably advanced against capital punishment. 1. To hang a man in cold blood is a barbarous survival from a more cruel age. To premeditately kill a prisoner in accordance with an archaic ritual is an act which ought to be perpetrated on any person, whatever the crime, ought not to be perpetrated on any person, whatever the crime. As such, behavior runs counter to and falls below the standard of conduct which I respect for human beings in general requires. Number 2. Capital punishment preludes repentance and reformation on the part of the offender. When Babylons hang an offender, it is despairing of ever turning such an offender into a law-abiding citizen, but is willing to sacrifice these objectives for the actions of revenge, euphemized as deterrent. Number 3. Once capital punishment is carried out, there is no way of correcting error. Number 4. There is a distinct, undesirable social effect of this form of punishment on the general community. Executions arouse morbid curiosity, obnoxious sensationalism, and foster sadistic tendencies among those closely associated with the practice that spills over to affect the community in a negative way. People have come from Montego Bay and the United States wanting to see executions, and goons liquor up themselves and look forwards with gleeful anticipation to hangings. All these arguments are logical, but 5% not conclusive. If capital punishment could be proven an effective deterrent, if there was not that very significant 95% on deterrent, these objectives would be nullified. Precisely because we cannot get around the 95% on deterrent, and because capital punishment by all rational criteria is not an effective deterrent. These objectives are logical and forceful. This is one line of the objection. There is another line of objection that is not intellectual, a line of objection based on the way reality of capital punishment as observed by a cell on death row. The bizarre proceeding began 7 days before the scheduled date of execution. The sacrifice to be is handcuffed and dragged away by the death squad to the condemned cells, located not 30 feet from the gallows, until he is hanged. It is a policy of Babylon that the sacrifice to be is made to suffer by the most thorough and systematic torture. First, they demand a list of the victim's favorite foods. Every day until they hang him, they will spend hundreds of dollars to provide the very best in food: turkey, steak, pies, cigarettes, stout, peanuts, and even eggs, fried sunny side up if the victim so desires. Only alcohol and women are not offered. The whole objective of this feeding routine is to let the victim have the best food in abundance and eat it, stuffed himself, knowing that when the 7 days are up, he'll hang and leave all such goodies behind in the land of living. The priests, reverends of every denomination are available on the victim's request. High-ranking elders who would never care about the prisoner's predicament and who have no intention of doing anything to save his life drop all other business and hasten to the condemned man to save his soul. If the victim desires, he can be baptized. They make daily visits to the victim, and when they hang him, the priest will be there to say the final prayer. Afterwards, before they dump the body in the 3-story grave, he'll attend to ashes and dust to dust, like a vulture waiting the advent of death. For the 7 days, the victim is exposed to the sound of the gallows being tested each morning over that period. The funk and his orderlies arrive to put his pet machine through its motions. The mind-blowing sounds of its working reverberate through the entire prison for 7 days. Even on that final morning, this goes on right next door to the condemned cells, keeping the victim in constant torture. Whenever this machine is not being tested, eerie silence covers the building and spills over the cons in the yard. The feeling of death is in the air, and only the goons are happy. Some of them. Visits are allowed to condemn prisoners but visitors are brought right to the door of the cell. Few family or others visit condemned prisoners, and those who visit once rarely repeat the traumatic ordeal it is. More tears have been shed at these cells and inside those cells than at the foot of the cross. After 6 days of this concentrated torture, the vultures gather in final preparation for the sacrifice. At dusk, the executioner arrives at the prison. That night, he sleeps in the prison so that no unforeseen circumstance might delay his arrival for the job next morning. As the night rubs out the final vestige of the day, the condemned man acknowledges the coming of the end, and the tension in the whole prison moves towards its peak. When the final morning, that last day on earth, arrives, most victims are by then vegetables. The concentrated torture and fear of finality of death reduce them to hunks of flesh, blood and bones, without any other distinction. They have been broken, crushed, and murdered even before they are killed. Executions are scheduled for 8:30 in the morning. One such morning, all prisoners remain under lock. On such mornings, all prisoners remain under lock till after the killing. At this point, the tension in the prison is at its zenith. So until the bloody task has been done, the prison is locked down. The prison's medical officer, the superintendent, a senior police officer from the area, the parson, and other official vultures are prepared for the execution. The greatest fear of prisoners on death row is that at this point of the proceeding, he will be beaten to death by the goons before they put him on the gallows. Prisoners work over at the gallows during execution. These prisoners take the dead men from the rope, clean them, put them in a coffin, and bury them. These prisoners, sometimes with tears in their eyes, often related to us how Glenroy Pusey, Junior Telfer, and others were almost beaten to death before they were hung. How Eddie Fraser's head was pulled right off his body. Everybody on the row knew these stories and equally feared such an experience. The death squad moved in first and attended to the condemned prisoner. They returned to him, then his clothes and all other personal effects taken from him when he entered prison. After he is dressed, the goons strapped on the leather stiff jacket and he is escorted to the gallows. Then the official vultures file into the stand around the gallows. The priest say the last prayer. The sacrifice to be speaks his last words. Then the funk gives the hangman the okay. Once the executioner pulls the lever, the victim is supposed to die instantly. Not always. Sometimes, as in the case of Eddie Fraser, the head is jerked right off the body. At other times, the victims continue to struggle for minutes until he finally suffocated in his own blood. Then thrashing cease The medical officer crawled down into the hole below the gallows with his stethoscope to certify that the sacrifice is killed before he makes out the death certificate. As soon as the killing is over, the bell is rung. The black flag is hoisted above the prison and a notice placed on the outside of the gate. A coroner's inquest is immediately held in the prison. After a lot of bureaucratic crap, the coroner somehow arrives at the verdict that nobody is criminally responsible for the death of the sacrifice. During the lunch break, the coffin bearing the body is hauled onto a cart to the rear of the prison and dumped into a 3-story grave. They call this justice. Be warned, you hypocrites. There is blood on your hands. Be warned, you hypocrites. There is blood on your hands. Yes, you see, it's that chapter 7, you know, of the book Death Row, explaining capital punishment to the item. You see it. I hope the item understand. Bitter, you know? Yeah. So when we will touch it again, we'll continue with chapter 8. See? So the item can, you know, catch a level. But it won't be very long still. Cause like when we climb up to the 10,000, we have other things we want, other prospects we want to venture upon. So we'll clean up them speedily and get a move on. This is what I say. So I want to give thanks again for the audience, and we want to say share, like, and subscribe in a Rastafari name. You see it, I make the youth them know the history and the struggles when it never stop, when it never cease. You see it, so Rastafari, and I give thanks. See? Yes, I.